if Ms. Collis worked on taxpayer time? Do you have any proof at all?
I'm sorry, can you...
Do you know if Ms. Collis worked on taxpayer time? Do you have any proof?
Do I know if Ms. Collis
worked on taxpayer time? Do you have any proof of that at all?
I do not know the answers to those questions. Those are things, once again, we're going to have to ask Bryan Lentz. One thing we do know is she worked out of his office and received the campaign bonus for the work that she did. Those bonuses have been found to be illegal.
But that doesn't necessarily indicate illegal behavior on behalf of the recipient.
It doesn't necessarily...
It doesn't necessarily indicate illegal behavior on behalf of the recipient of that bonus?
Making a claim about illegal activity. I do not know the answers to that. This is certainly something that's continuing to be investigated by the Attorney General. You may ask those questions as well. I'm not drawing a conclusion. What I am saying is there certainly has been criminal behavior, the subject of which leads right to...
You're making very specific accusations here. That
I'm making a specific accusation that the Democrat Campaign Committee, which was controlled by Meehan, hired people who then received campaign bonuses for working on political campaigns. That has been found to be illegal. People are going to jail for it. The question is who has benefited from that work, whether it's illegal or not illegal. We're talking about an individual who's made a claim of being a reformer. And when somebody was asked to simply testify before a grand jury, Bryan Lentz stood up and said Todd Aegis should step down from his leadership position, simply because he was asked to testify before a grand jury. So obviously he sees that there's some problem associated with that conduct.
Some of these issues were first raised against Mr. Lentz by Tom Gannon. As you know, that another part of the bonus gate proceedings lists Mr. Gannon as a chief beneficiary of Mr. the allegations against Mr. Purcell. There are other folks that you've worked with in this campaign and other points. Are you going to do what you're asking Mr. Lentz to do and utterly cut yourself off from anybody? Mr. Gannon has been helping your campaign.
I'm asking questions about what we know. Listen, it talks about all the houses of those who benefited.
Well, but should you be accepting his help while saying to should you be accepting the help of Southeastern Republicans who were named in Tom's report as beneficiaries of the Purcell allegations, the Purcell alleged misuse?
What we have here is a case in which there has been convictions. When there is a conclusion with respect to that, we will certainly look and see what happens regarding to the ongoing investigation being done by Bonus Gate. But I'm looking again at answering the specific questions we're asking today.
And also,
well, some of this information has been recently released to the public by virtue of the report that was not just generated by the grand jury, but giving public access to those of us who have been able to follow the ongoing proceedings in court. Those documents have not been available to the average public until recently.
You described Bryan as a rubber stamp. He was a Vince Fumo Mike Vian rubber stamp. But unless my timeline is way off, he never actually served with Mr. Vian. Mr. Vian was defeated in the fall that he was elected in, wasn't he?
Certainly the whole deal. Mr. Vian was the person who was behind the Democrat Campaign Committee that helped to get Mr. Lentz elected.
Well, how can he be a rubber stamp if they never served together?
Well, he's certainly the rubber stamp for the electoral policies that helped to get elected.
And again, with Mr. Fumo, how is he a rubber stamp with Mr. Fumo?
Well, once again, we had activities here of a corrupt nature by virtue of here within the Capitol Dome. And we had a guy that says he wanted to bring a new ethical voice to Harrisburg, and I'm challenging him to stand behind that.
Mr. Meehan, I think that the points that have been made is that the grand jury looked really exhaustively at the campaigns from 06, and there were a whole number of Democrats who benefited. Do you have any evidence that Representative Lentz knew what was happening with Ms. Hollis?
I think those are questions I'd like him to answer.
But
what did he know? Those are exactly what I'd like him to answer. That's a good question. Ask Mr. Lentz. I want to know what he knew about Ann Collis, when he knew it.
Let's say he didn't. I mean, do you think he should still be accountable for that? I mean, because clearly this wasn't an operation that was run out of his office. If he didn't know what was going on and what the bonuses
I
were.
want to know the answer. We're talking about somebody who is talked about coming up here to be a reformer, who talked about coming up here to be a change. I want to know what he knew about the association of what people, it was a corrupt operation that people have gone to jail for, that worked directly to support his campaign, and I want to know what he knew and when he knew about that. Okay, I'll take one more question.
let's say that his answer that he I didn't know. Your campaign has said that this information will call into question his fitness for office. There were people who circulated nominated petitions on your behalf that were demonstrated to have done so in improper ways. Should you be held accountable for that in the same way?
Well, I certainly have been the person who, when I saw that was reported to be an activity, turned it over to the district attorney, and asked that that be investigated. Whatever the resolution may be, should be, is currently being criminally investigated. And I'm the person who turned that over. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Let me just say at the outset of the two campaigns that are here today, his is the only campaign that is under active investigation by the Attorney General's office for the fraud that you referenced earlier with regard to petitions. So that's number one. Number two, if you drove up to Harrisburg for this press conference, I apologize. You should ask him for gas money back to Philadelphia for this nonsense that you just had him try to link me with Bonusgate. I was sworn in 2007. I learned about Bonusgate the same way most people did, through the newspapers. I had nothing to do with Bonusgate, no knowledge of Bonusgate, and he has no evidence rendering me unfit for service in higher office. And he can walk away and he can run away. He's got no answers for you on his press release. He's got no answers for you on the forgeries. This press conference was a whole lot of nonsense. And anybody that knows anything about Bonusgate, which no one, why he would call this in Harrisburg, where people actually understand Bonusgate and know the fact that I was sworn in 2007, know the fact that, in fact, that when Bill DeWeese was, quote, arrested, he had to resign under the rules of the House. When he was arrested, he had to resign. So I don't know what more I can say about just how completely baseless this press conference is. I'll tell you what it tells me, though. It tells me that Pat Meehan has nothing to talk about when it comes to his campaign. He's a prosecutor that never prosecuted a case. That's the summary of his bio. And this press conference demonstrated that fact. He's a prosecutor that never prosecuted a case, and he's got nothing to run on. He's got no issues. He's got no ideas. So he issues press releases with inflammatory headlines about people being fit for service. Guess what? I was fit to serve my country 3 times overseas in the Army. I was fit to serve my country as a prosecutor where I actually prosecuted cases, and I'm fit to serve in the United States Congress, and that's why I'm here.